Recording in progress. Gala Rinpoche, could we do a sound check?
Oh yeah, ngā tu te le. Kuku tu e.
Ngā tu te le.
Ya. Te pār thonga yo marwe. Oh chit mene tondu me cham shaba ta aku me do. Ta de tene digre. Ta chigurwa. Oke yorbe handi. Na tondu. Ta de tondu di tondu su yamusha. Oh yeah.
Good morning again, Rinpoche. Thank you for your precious teachings. And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for your translations, and welcome to all online participants. We're happy you can join us. We have one or two more teachings on this text, and if you'd like to make an offering to Geshe for his teachings, or to Katrina for her translations, or for the Abbey, to the Abbey for hosting, you'll find out how to do that in the chat box. Okay, so we'll begin with some preliminary prayers.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor of the world supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With a supreme sign's face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is a teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strew Mount Meru, foreland, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall a rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Dixon again la.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, that's so. Oh, they are just on Gabo Shimbisole. They did the back of Songdoa. Jitan Kuba Chinibas. Jitan Razo Mitsam Malia. Kubas to Chicken Mambuchi and Shiora. Oh, to me, all the soba. And it's meeting Bala Soba, coming Shibuchi and Yora. Kubachi and Mambo, Mendeba Mambuchi and Yora. Take Kajan, but this Hamas of your Jitan Kuba Chinibas. It's all Marik, they say. All day, Varanzo Susu Samlutanda day. We need you Susu Samlutanda, Susu Condition, Shanda Condition, Chito net on the shape. We need you one day. Shan Cham, $1 to $1 to Mendoza. We need you to conquer the pa, Hamagunisora. They saw a Marik batteries. Tame Bola Tatu, you and it's some Kimbash, Shala Trado Shell Soba. Condo Tanga Jelly Soba to Gaga. Nation one day. Ran David tapped the women tapped the carry, but I was a Martian, eh? The young girl. Since you didn't go back in your body, so Marik, but it is in it, and when there's some time machine, you won't be young girl. Can she told it 10 was? That is somebody. Kuba sama sama doya to dalia. Some dash was Kuba. Very nice Rana came at you, but may want the Samlutan daddy, Shinkuyara. Jineku, she told it the dog was. Oh, teenage one idea was a tonsona. And it meant about somebody. She do this order. Teenage one idea, Carrisona. She told danger never John soon say. 단지 좀 되게 땡진 돼버리죠. 소야돼. 네, 라 다다 셰제 내줄 다다를 써봐. 대 상만을 봐 다다한테 몽바시어 띠바세 된다고 송바래. 야, 띠바 세워이나 아니 그것도 좀 봐좀 너도 와. 야, 어떻게 소나?
So here, to begin with, as Je Lama Tsongkhapa has said, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So in our world, whatever sort of degenerations there are, whatever kind of faults, bad things, the sufferings that we experience, the unwanted, the disharmony and the conflict, all of that has its roots in ignorance, in our way of thinking, of being sort of deluded or unaware of the actual nature of things. I mean, none of us wants to suffer. We and others all want to have happiness and don't want to suffer. But due to our way of thinking, we grasp at a self of that which is actually selfless. We get sort of arrogant with respect to ourselves. We have this thought of I, and we get arrogant and jealous and prideful. And we don't know the actual methods by which to achieve our happiness and to eliminate our suffering. So all of these faults, as it says here, the root of all these is ignorance, is that mistaken knowing. And so because we don't have a knowledge of the way that things actually are, we don't see reality properly, then we end up suffering. So you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance, will counteract that ignorance. So if we were to be able to come to an understanding of the way that things actually are, their causes and effects, then we could pacify all of that unwanted suffering. And when it comes to what is the actual reality, you taught that it is dependent origination. So here, when it comes to our understanding of ourselves and others and all of the world, if we are able to remove this kind of ignorance that misperceives all of that, then we can undo the root of all of the degenerations that we experience.
Oh yeah. Oh, the ko ngazo. Tende di peke chimbu chenang ba chen peke chimbu so gara. Tende de ngazo kasima bulab sarimba. Kyuta kela tenje jebari jungas. Tambu ngabu kandejine ko kyu ta kenyi de tsone ne kare tsogudo. Kare tsone kare yongudo samte abuja ha ko go gara. Tela samlo ba da che shenda jine chi yongu ba samlo ta de ne je ko no ge gara. Ya ko jide kamle chi chi shina tsela so ba ina da. Nangi tidu la so ba ina da kare ina ko te kyuta ken kare le tene yongudo otane. Kyuta ken la tenje delne yongu gara. O di ende ko Drepung shenda samlo mata che kyujin de ka kyuside nyelen de kogora. De kyunyi yora kyudan kinside kora ngo yurji ki kyuchi ku yora. Sabyo de je matam de sabyo de nyelen de ra. Ta sada chuda meta lo la soba te kanga de leji chige de ra. Jidan ko kyuside nyelen da leji chige kanga ko chore. Ina ya kyudan kinside kyude nyelen ki ngo yoro. Timu mai beku dera. Jaine kona timu mai beku shikora. Ngabu karene kon nyelen juwe de timu mai beku shikora. Tenchi chigene sada chuda chuda longla sobate timu ya shuri chiri dera. Chuda ken la tenchen drebana jungate yabu samla kortumna. Ta sosolan debe te kari yemme debe kari disego inedra. Penjo rabu kari yung jine tondo tamge inedra kari na. 어디 규대 데레샤삼 규대니 좀네 규다 깨디 아버지 좀마도 현다 제바보 예바데 삼로 코로 고야게 엄마라 그래서 데 초진에 하공개스르도 와 갈래게디 신가답도 가르고도 데서서 갈래게디 지고도 와 어디 인데고 규다 깨를 때네 깨와 되게 지대인지 제바보라서 봐 현지가 생겨요 말에서 규진 상도는 데부데 깨온 거래서 gyurgin tsama chego rese. Megi wachido gejin karido, tengin karido te hago wache. Ten gejin de basi tengin de tsama sona, rebu de konde bete yabu kye ongro wa. San deje dendri de pe. chi naga tende stanga zo kasama bushe so ne ji den da zishin na ze tando la so ba te zo a ani zambulen chi kimja ri na ko tindi yo ya chi timbu che dewa che ne te ka de ku do kuda ke kar ku do eso sero naga tende si naga yo lang da lang lu kanga te sama she so sa tipe ke chimbu do a o tilia te ne meta ba se ro kuda kengi kide ko keji kin juro de ha ko ndo te ya wo cha ko na keji ke kon ju ne ju che ne do ai ba te me da ba da ani ko ba te ne ko ta da ya che ne ko ju che to nge ngo ju re yin ba ju ke che de go ra ne so so da je ka sa ru che ne o re ta le ma do che sa ti chi lam ne ya ho chi ten de tu de ju che ba da ha ko na me da ba da ra ani chi 야가를 지내 콘디 준도야 임바 강가 대화를 지내 준도야 임바 진짜 진짜 야구하고 도도 야 뜻이라나
So here in Buddhism, then, dependent origination is extremely important. This teaching of the Buddha on dependent origination, and we have talked about this a lot. One level of dependent origination is that of causality, that all results arise from causes and conditions. So we need to understand that process of causality. Like when it comes to external phenomena, we need to have an understanding of what causes and what conditions are necessary to bring something about. So there's many levels of dependent arising. We can talk, though, basically when it comes to causality of causes and conditions with respect to internal and external dependent arising. So, for example, like with a seed, a rice seed is the kind of substantial cause that will lead to a rice sprout. It's sort of the uncommon, the unique cause of that, or we sometimes use the word substantial cause, as well as having the kind of coordinating conditions, the soil and the heat and the moisture and so forth. And so understanding what it is that is necessary to bring about a particular result, if we can think well about the kind of causes and conditions, understand the way that those bring about a particular result, then we can sort of make effort at the proper causes. So when it comes to anything within the world, if we want to gain a good harvest from our crops or some other sort of result, we need to have an understanding of the causality. What are the causes? What is the substantial cause that is necessary? What are the kind of coordinating conditions? It's not as though there is some sort of creator who wills things into existence, but rather when all of the causes and conditions are assembled, are complete, that result will come about. So having that knowledge of what are the kind of adverse conditions, what will prevent this from coming about, what are the conducive conditions that lead to it coming about, we can understand then our external world, the kind of environment that we live in, the trees and the sort of external things, as well as what brings about happiness and harmony within society. And then there is the level of internal dependent arising. How do we take rebirth? What are the kind of causes and conditions that lead to that? So when we have this kind of understanding of dependent arising as dependency on causes and conditions, this leads into an understanding of impermanence. If something is dependent upon causes and conditions, then it changes moment to moment. It's not sort of static and remaining the same. And so too, those things that we ascribe as being happiness, we see that they don't actually last and remain. So it is through this understanding of dependent arising that we are led into the understanding of impermanence and suffering and so forth.
Oh yeah. Oh, daga na shi ta ande je so so sam na nang ten de sam ta na ro. Nga ju ten de la chung ni she de she so. To me ma ri chen ni ba le sa ne so ba nam she. Ba yin ya li shi ba ming su che de ne. Mi na wa na che la so ba de. De ne yu to so thong ane so ti tu de chi yo. O te le te ne ane ju te wa ta me te wa ta shi te so ka ga. Je ne ke ya ta na ya ta chi te so ka ga yo de she do. O ti inde ko lu de ya chu de zwa shi bo je sa yin jung a ro sa chu me ju sa yin jung a so ra cha gu cha da ro ani len be cha da nam ga dong sa ge cha da shi bo je na lo ya sa chu me lo jung a te ka ga te gu do lungu kutuwa mamu jile teshi geni ya tsote kutuwa indi ko daa siti rawa chi yo na ene ko tsene kadire sene dire su tu sa shikora ene pungbu sobu chida shiba chingi wara ngarasul sobu cha kandi ne chitu patu kawata na ingeji ragu marwa nangchata kawine ene tsoa namju shibe nane tsoa dan dushini de ma shu yong wara chi yabudu yabumendo chi de tesunal midwa 미기 시바 나베 시바 네 시바 세로 그래서 강가 풍부할 바 팬도네 레르날 라이메라 아카르세 테달라 땡젠 델네 담부 기두사 주진 만부절 땡젠 델네 다데 레고도와 아니 바 다세 맹다세데야 다시 차셔 때절라 땡네 바 딱바 점지도 마도 라와지요나 아니 풍부다 소보다 셈다 소아때절라 저amenge지 코나 로가치 고도 디 나네 고 딱바라 수레 치고다 디 공은지 제고라 디레스 우조세 티요 마라 그래서 다음에 봐서로 다음에 다 봐서도 주다께 초다트들 삼로야고 치다나 아니 유라시엔지 깨지린 유라시엔지 근데 그 주다께 경게 초된게 선부치 된게 미신 대공게인데 라와전에 된게 매버데 와라토라 어디에 그 때내 딱 봐서 주다 깨를 때내 깨주지자 삼다 다시를 때내 그런 어디 다시 차셔를 때내 봐 따보마도 차셔 나네지 라야 매봐 근데 삼을 거나 다음에 부터 좀 거라도도 라와 매봐 주다 깨가 라와 매봐 깨는데 그 라와 전에 깨지요 말아 주질 대신 될리야 유도가라 다시 다 차셔를 때내 봐 명다디 지금 저거 조사 요마라 근데 때네 딱 배때데 또 소소 다 쇼를 삼 다네다 강갈 담보치도 주다키알 때네 간데치고도 아니 라게 맹지 따네 진주 조세시 랍데자 차셜 때네 파다 받삼레삼 근데 저 삼을 거나 아니 지금과 강가메다 바다 다음에 바다 지 거하게 동야 단도 야보에 파 주도하다 그래서 삼아
So here, when it comes then to thinking about ourself, we have been talking about dependent origination in terms of the 12 links of dependent origination, how it is that we come to take rebirth. So looking at this process by which we have a moment of ignorance, which in turn leads us to create karmic formations, leaving an imprint on our consciousness, which in turn leads to the development of these four mental factors of name and form, and then the 6 sense bases. And in dependence upon those sense bases coming into contact with various external objects, we then give rise to various feelings. And then we have like craving and grasping, and there is the whole cycle of aging and death and so forth. So we can look first at the kind of causal process, the way in which ignorance causes us to create karma and so forth, but also even looking at the way that the person is designated. I mean, we are designated on this particular basis of designation, these aggregates. And when we look at our aggregates, looking at, say, first our form aggregate, we are composed of the various elements: earth, water, fire, wind, space. And so when we look at the kind of earth, the sort of solidity of the body, the water, the cohesion, the heat, the kind of ability to digest and so forth, we also need to have wind to be able to breathe in and out. So when we begin to look at the basis of designation of a person, we can see that there's no autonomous sort of independent person. If there were such a thing, we must be able to sort of point to it. But when we begin to look through all of the kind of components upon which this thing, the I or the self, is designated, we look through all of our physical body. There's nothing that you can point to that is the I or the self. And so then one might look to mind, to consciousness, to the various kinds of consciousnesses. We have feelings. Are those the I? Or is it the kind of discrimination or discernment that says this is this? Or then we can look at our various types of consciousness. We have our mental and our sense consciousnesses and so forth. And so when we begin to look through through, we can't find something that we can point to that says that is the self, but rather the self, the I, is something which is merely designated on this particular collection, this basis. And so understanding that, we can come to an understanding that there is no such autonomous self. We can come to see that the person, the I, is someone that is selfless and is impermanent. The self only comes about due to various causes and conditions, as we saw in the process of the 12 links of dependent origination, but it is also something that is dependently designated in the sense that the self is something, the I is something that is given as a label on the basis of this particular collection of aggregates, but we can't find anything that we can sort of point to as being that I. So through this kind of understanding of both causality, dependent arising in that way, and dependent designation, we can come to understand that the person is impermanent and selfless and suffering and so forth, that it is something that is merely designated on this particular basis. Just
oh yeah, what did you? That didn't change, so no mirror machine and Raco, Chiso Chingam do Togora, Togo de Co, Dawajan and Togo Yona. Oh, Jenny, the one she could tangent in so the Pojo Kangal tangent railne, and a co Yabu Chiso in a Karina Yabuchaku Yora. Madochi, Sosuchi, oh, Sosuchi, Kangaga to Rawachin to Yeshi Omardo, Iloko, no mirror machine, Chambata Sawagatone. 파마인다 사자인다 부부들이나 지질 장바다 제외권에 따고 내송거다 아 삼상아데 베케 체시지게 아니 샹데 통주체다 나마도 메신다 가르스네 나오면도 나데라서 예스 마삼나 강가파테도라 서바콤도라 어티치데네 거 상마땡지 레벨 좋아서자 대화지 연구이네 파지 상마땡지 렐네 연구여라 장바다 저와다라 처음에 집을 써봐. 아, 삼자 삼로데 소소장장 개체쇼라치. 아, 나한테 개체쇼이 마도 현달티 메신이 현을 통주제다 가가 연구라. 어때 연구고 그 참아 땡지레 버는 좋아이 바다 하고도. 직장자가 제시오 말아. 편주지도 가가 직실 받대네. tempo yonga tewa yonga ke chajin kare to butuye ke chajin kare te de kyudi kende da chebache tele samlu tanje o de yago mare te yosho sam te yago te ko de sam te sam dana tenjin de bar jonga ina samma tempo a samma debo ke bade yongo ara o te de ko tende se de samma cha yora na mi de chen na mi che tenjin de bar jo yago che dewe kyulin do ya kare chigodo ma tembe chen tunge kyulin do ya kare yogodo o te samma 주진들 삼로다시 주단 깽게 겐데 파세 튕겐데 투 덴데 삼로다시 때로와 어때 강갈 파 자야요라 지솔레 자야요라 점불 롱발레 자야요마도 거서라 가실마도 자서마데 마로와 땡진데 버정데 토반메 상말리 캡데요라 주단 깽 야고 영야게 주단 깽데 야부 사스 야보 영그래 도보 영야게 주단 깽데 야소스는 거 도보 영그라 어디 인데고 tenjin debra chungwa de chi jang jang ge rangwa de chen yong ya me ba pen ju sang ma tenjin del ne sang me sam lu ta ya ga de ta ne ya ga de yong ra do de ta ne do de yong ra o tin de yin de da ma da tu che so o da tun da ti re ka su ra ji de ku ba chi ni pa te za ma ri te ka shi tong ye de do ba tenjin debra chungwa su ten de pe ke chen bo o de 이 가르치고서 뭐 내줄 가르쳐 버데 됐다고라 소소그 남절로 해게나 삼대베 텔레 마셔서 텐쟁원에 주다 계속네 가르 연구도 가르다고도 텔레다고라 농원에 코라텔 가르이나 주다 계게 다시대 샤샬 때네세 딜렌도 뭐 내줄 가르쳐버데 야고신도 거라 근데 디베케션 버래 이제 인도 가르쳐오라 야 어떻게 실람나 인도 그래
So likewise, when it comes to not just ourselves, but like our family, the society that we live in, we should recognize how it is that we are dependent upon others. Our own happiness, our own suffering as well, is dependent upon others. If we have the kind of ability to see others with love and compassion and care about others, then we in turn will experience happiness from that. If instead we sort of only think about ourselves, we only want our own happiness, we see ourselves as more important than others, and that in turn leads us to sort of look down upon, disparage other beings, we can't achieve happiness just all on our own, all by ourselves, but rather our happiness, our well-being is integrally related with others, is dependent upon others. And so here, causality, understanding dependent origination applies really to everything to create harmony and happiness in our family, in our society, with those around us. We need to have an understanding of what are the causes and conditions that will lead to that. How will that come about if we create certain conditions and causes? What are the things that will undermine our happiness and harmony with others? So whether we are thinking about our own kind of family unit or our society, all the way up to countries, the whole world, having an understanding of the way that things actually are, causality, what are good causes and conditions, what are going to be harmful. Again, we can't just be all on our own like an isolated little island, but rather this kind of understanding of dependent origination is applicable not just in thinking about the causes of external things, but as well the causes of our happiness and harmony in the world. So this is extremely important. Again, as Lama Tsongkhapa has said, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all of these is ignorance. So we need to look at the kind of sort of rather than just follow after our innate sense of an I, we need to apply our kind of analytical faculties and understand that our happiness and suffering is integral with others. It is dependent and arises in dependence upon others. So this kind of understanding of dependent origination is really, it's not just applicable to understanding causality in the kind of external sense, but also in terms of our happiness and harmony with others. Dependent origination is really a central part of that.
Oh yeah. Oh, the Indica soda. As not Sanjay Songutua. Sanjay Jide come let you, but they wait on others. Jide they wait on others. Sanjay Namni Jungadera. Should they there conjugally they wait on others. The teacher Yabuchi they don't get on that. So I never said Chambacha con Yabuchi. They were they just give us a tear to it on others. They should keep it in the Yuantelia. Ne Sabacum, Chambazi, the Sabacum Balasobat in the Siena, and the Koya was a near to Roa. Sabacum, that Tundu, Timbujet there, Tatunda. Timbana Mati Bachunani, Nami, Nada Chiso in a Kanga, and it, Chogra. Nako, some Tonda was a ton and Timbuja there, the Unguresa. Timbuja there, Sasuna, Lega. Mendoba say and the battery lega carina tea was a trip to this. Got to this a church again, a church I was told. Today I yet I know congregate somebody some good. Oh, tea in the car soda. Marazo Tendelia, Tenji Debrajo, Yan Samla, Tendelia, Tabache, Sambache, Combache. Yana Yadu said the Mishibe Momba also saw ne. Roa Mishibe Momba Azuka. Tongme Marikba, Satambuda, Mingda, Sazako Marikba, Chiyon Kayon Shedipa, never so attention Debrajon, and Namjuni, Abusamuta, Soso, attention Debrajon, Danjo, Kuda, Galatin, Soda, Samuta. Oh, Teletenera, and the Teletobacha Sambachene, Midawada, Tungawada, Tonga, Mebala Soba. There's Sama, La Koya, Cheritane. Let her simja Tamjegi, Troop Tungenge. They couldn't keep shooting you actually. They should have mentioned Diletanda, Yeri Messinalia, Kayon Yogero. Oh, Nicar so that Tente Samlutane, meeting by some J. Tamja Rere say, Lake Bechari, Rere in a Tubashene, Tar and Busamlutan. Kazeka Lake Yabuna Kamne, you can say, and they couldn't get Kansachi June. 심지어 탐절이야 펜바 줍통게 네가 용수 통게 진주로 시기 삼사 대단달이야 최ñe기 요 삼사 삼나 네 랍체보다 최ñe 꿀운디 고요라 어떤데 꿀로 세tem데 삼바쇼스 안되래
So the Buddha's coming to the world was for the purpose of happiness. The Buddha's teaching of the Dharma is in order to bring about happiness. He taught non-harm, the importance of love and compassion, and taught dependent origination in order for us to have happiness. And so one of the most important components is being able to have patience, to not sort of be reactive to others, but instead create the kinds of causes and conditions for harmony. So when we think about dependent origination, when we have a good understanding of causality, if we want to accomplish something in the world, whether it is like our Dharma practice or something worldly, understanding the proper causes and conditions is really indispensable for that. If we want to do some kind of work that improves the world, we need to have an understanding of what are the causes that will lead to this. And really, all of our problems, all of our suffering comes from this nescience, this lack of understanding, this delusion. It's called this kind of fundamental ignorance. And if we regularly think about dependent origination, if we habituate our minds to that, we can eliminate gradually, eventually, our ignorance. We can get an understanding of suffering and selflessness and emptiness and so forth. And so that really comes by understanding dependent arising. And when we take that even further, we can see that it is the case that this sort of culmination of this understanding comes in the state of Buddhahood. If we really want to be able to achieve the highest happiness, not just for ourselves, but bring that about for others, we can strive for the state of Buddhahood in which one has developed all good qualities and eliminated all faults. And so here we should take up this kind of attitude, this motivation, thinking that whatever kind of efforts I make, whatever sort of difficulty that I go through, I'm doing this sort of practice in order to be able to become such a being who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities. We need to have a kind of longer term sort of thinking that we are going to continue undertake this practice in order to be able to achieve that state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So whatever kind of efforts we make, may it go toward that, particularly here listening to the Dharma. So please set such a proper motivation.
Oh yeah. Chunam Tamje Julie Chunse Sholoka Chiva, Titonda Shiva. Oh, Tin Dornase. Sigan Tambuse, Chunam Tamje Julie Chunse Chicanterwa. Sigan Tambu Tende Yala Juni Jikone, Koaro Korwe, Guam, Tarwe Pato Chube Chunis, Tende Yala Juni Kone Koa Korgiora. Oh, Tikoa Koya Gatene, Judicaresanase, Chune. Pato chebe chone le kune lonje je iban duji je le kune lonje je ro nyemo ba na min be se chagda la so ba nyemo ro te ya kebe chungge de nga o nyamba nga je re de ora imbe tarwan de ba nam je te da la tembar meja o she minjik ba shi na ne 민직 바시고네 최대교라 사제 제가 시간 당보되게 민직 바시나네 가르송 거라서나 민직 바시나네 파도 주베 춘데 인시 담제발라 민직 베고네 사제지 최송 받된 바인도스 코아 코야게 주소데 차단라 소바 녀모 바테조레세 녀모 바테조레티 코아 코지게 주디레세 사제고 송교라 담제교라 Pardo chebe chundi yinse, kwa koche liya, kwa le dharma chunge parche chenge chudi direse, parche tamche bala mijik baase. O di sungu yarese, chuna tamche gyule chungu saade. Ya, tichilana.
No. So here, then picking up in the text, this is in regards to that verse where it's the phenomena that arise from causes, the Tathagata proclaimed those causes as well as their cessation, thus taught the paragon of virtue. So here, picking up on page 102, so here, this, in short, with this first line of the verse, the Buddha is saying the obstructions to liberation, or the cause of passing through cyclic existence by means of the 12 factors of dependent arising, is the afflictions that motivate karma. So those who desire liberation should not be involved with these. So in asserting these are the obstructions, I'm talking about causality, he gave the teaching in this line of the verse with one of the 4 fearlessnesses, the fearlessness of giving the teaching on obstructions. So here, this verse encapsulates the 4 fearlessnesses, and this first line, which is identifying what the obstructions are, then is teaching by way of the fearlessness of giving the teaching on the obstructions.
Oh yeah. And it's a ganibe, China the Julia, did you teach him so said? Oh, it's a ganibe, Marik Bala, so by Yala Junior, they don't go back to him. Yala Junior, they don't go back to them, never saw a chudera, Koya Chumes. Koya Chu let a Yumban go, Yimbu, you, they still never saw a chu or the essay. Take a resona, Kasada Chigi Tamusum to Tobe, Lambi Tembati in Betty. Kombarchako so she Mijiba Shin Ninju Tamjabala Mijiba Kone Sangichu. Never Jonas, Tela Tarkona, Talam de Samloton was in the coms or thing in June, Tela Tajik cutin direse, Tamjabal Kojiba Mera, Korangusum to change Sigiwara, when they should teach.
So then, with the second line, the Tathagata proclaimed those causes. The Buddha is saying these 12 factors, ignorance and so forth, have a cause that has a countermeasure that ceases karma and afflictions, which are the cause of cyclic existence, or the cause that is to be ceased. This countermeasure is the truth of the path, the direct perception of the selflessness of persons and objects. Therefore, you must cultivate it. So here, with that second line, he's giving this teaching by asserting definite emergence from the causes of cyclic existence, which, among the 4 fearlessnesses, is the fearlessness of indicating the path of definite emergence. So here, basically, the Buddha is saying, if you want to achieve freedom, then you need to follow this particular path. And he is speaking based upon the direct kind of knowledge that he has acquired himself, and therefore is fearless in indicating, as it says, the path of definite emergence.
Oh yeah. That Julan Goba Kayan Ba said, you don't go by the sugar and go to the sugar. Shebet go to the Lamden sugar. Chicken some best. Nyumbe, Nyambu Kansa, that check it on Musum to Tobe, Lamjet Temba, Kumbala Tene, Koe, Tongue, Kutan Sheba, and Goba Toba, you are in bed, Temba Sanje Ranija, oh, Lamde Combaina, and it go there to go and go to Tarwa the Togre, Sanje Chumde, the Ranija, take Comne, and the Tarwa Toba in his Basungu Aresawara. Ranija, the Darcom Tunga Kudan Sheba, Panso, she, Pamba Pinzo Tamjabal Museum. Pamba, Kanga de Com de Papansara Yins, Ne Pamba Yins, Tamjabal and Jigba Mari, Jigba Mebe con the Sunguara, when they sit in the rete or what tigre. Maranzo de Zenko Joseph Pamba Yensena, Jigba de Sheba Retiora. Jigba con the Sanje Chusumba, Titemba, you know, see how teach you.
So with the third line, as well as their cessation, the Buddha taught their cessation as well. The Buddha is saying, relying on cultivating true paths, directly cognizing the selflessness of persons and objects, which are the countermeasure to the afflictions, you will attain a cessation that brings an end to the suffering of cyclic existence and its causes. Thus, the Buddha himself meditated in this way and eliminated suffering and its causes. So here, this is really explaining true cessations, the cessation that is achieved through cultivating that path. So therefore, one can achieve a freedom freedom from suffering, a cessation of suffering. And the Buddha is speaking from his own experience. So the Buddha gave this teaching by means of fearlessness, of asserting his own aim of perfect abandonment. So the Buddha is able to proclaim his own abandonment fearlessly because it accords with reality. He has completely abandoned all of those afflictions. If we were to try to make such a proclamation, we would be fearful because we are lying. But the Buddha, because he has achieved this, is beyond any fear. So this is the means, the fearlessness of asserting his own aim of perfect abandonment.
Oh yeah. Kijo chimbe tege song sedera. Sanje ranyele kijo chimbo song shate ndege maris tege togbo kwerwa. Kijo chimbe tege song sede shebe kijo chimbo tumba ranyi ki serwa. Tedan gogwa ngondu zede. Yomoda shije tibon gogwa ngondu zedwa. Tene landor jene nam langja kare torcha kare. Tungele tarbe langja kare wa. Ne tarwa tobala torja de karente sama ngusum do se rani ji se ba yin so ra landor yin ne nam ngusum do se ba tar chen de se de ge sum ba yin be ke jon chen bo she rani tokba phunzo tamje bal me tokba phunzo landor yin ne sama tamje chimba che shinge tokba yin se tar chen ba yin se tamje bal me ji ba ra ne tokba phunzo tamje bal me ji ba se o ti deng do a mi ji be ko ne che tem ba
So then with the fourth line, thus taught the paragon of virtue. So we had talked about earlier, those who would say like, well, why is the Buddha praising himself? It's not right to do so. However, of course, the Buddha is speaking from having directly seen or realized these things. So with the fourth line, thus taught the paragon of virtue, the Buddha is saying the teacher, the paragon of virtue, himself actualized true cessation and true paths in this way and brought to perfection the direct perception of what to adopt and what to abandon. So the Buddha knows directly from having achieved these direct realizations what it is that should be taken into practice and what should be avoided. And as he taught accordingly, he is the paragon of virtue or the great ascetic. He gave this teaching by means of the fearlessness of asserting his own perfect realization. So here, the Buddha has brought his own realization to its culmination, has understood everything exactly as it is. And therefore, with this fourth line, this is indicating then the fearlessness of asserting his own perfect realization.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that Sanje Nila Sigora. Minji Bashi, Yandenga in Besse. Ranshaji Tamjabalas. Maram Minji Bashi, Yande to Tobio. Tenete Panja did it, Yambo did it, Tarba top to this. Oh, Shandala, but Tina comes soon. Maranga Tina comes in the Chonsons. Soon, but Ranshaji Tamjabala, Cordinado Passawa, maybe as a Corma Benado Tindesumbala, or Tindesoso, and that man you ever done in Otsara, or Tinde Passawa, maybe Jiba, maybe Conepa. Rani la tishin shibata. Kishon chembo she somebody else. Nicade. Or Kishon chembo she. Oh, yeah.
Sumbala.
Kishon chembo so. Kishon chembo so.
Kyadan shipshi shedun.
Ore yeah. Kishon chembo she sombe. Minjik bashi temba yindi so adam minjik bashi kone shu temba de. O de kishon chembo ta tinde rang la chide chene kyo yo ma de se te so yeah.
So In this way, the teacher Buddha possesses the good qualities of the four fearlessnesses and thus had no sense of unease in asserting his own and others' aims when among his disciples. So here, because he has achieved these kinds of qualities, the Buddha has no trepidation, no sort of hesitation in proclaiming his own qualities among his disciples, because these are things that he has actually achieved. And so too, he is saying, I have done like this. And so if you follow as well, you can do likewise. So if someone were to make such a proclamation without any qualities, there would be a kind of problem. They would probably feel some fear, but a Buddha is able to do this because he has achieved those qualities. So therefore, when he called himself Tathagata and paragon of virtue, he was showing fearlessness in the sense of he has nothing to fear in asserting such qualities because he has them.
Oh yeah. Do de jangi kong chang ge do. Do de jangi long chang ge wa. Ran shen tan do se. Tamba sanje chum den de ge rani ji tok be mi ji ba shi bu de ni ba yin se. Ne kiran zo de na shi kom da. Ni yon de do top tu ge so ge wa ra. Ran shen tan do yi shi dan se tok ba pyu sum so ba de ra. Lan do ji ne be. Pang da se de pang ba pyu sum so ba tam che wa se. Min jung se do da ko topje ke lamde kön de ba meba so ke lamde ro de de ba so parje tere se pangje de tere se o te zo tama ane rang ngo sum de kanje se nyamyo sa ne tene sha la sum ba de so ra ke de ba ra ten je se o ten de mi ji ba shi ko ne chu ten ba re mu de shan da ke se mu de ba shan da ke o ten de ki zo ko na ma tende sheba de mares che so kenji situgu mares ta meba mare te jinde ban jo mare ta yo de no tende ka kya su che ne pa te kenjo gu mares pa sa wa me mi ji de kenji situgu ma kenji tu gu mares kyo la cha cha los ya wo ti chi ba ya ti chi no.
So then, as a source for this, we cite Maitreya's ornament for the sutras, where he states, again, talking about the Buddha's four fearlessnesses, he says, you who teach the sublime wisdom, the abandonment, and the obstruction. So here there is the fearlessness with respect to having attained perfect abandonment, and who has attained this kind of sublime wisdom, referring to then the perfect realizations. So the Buddha possesses both those perfect or those excellent abandonments and realizations. So you who teach the sublime wisdom, the abandonment and the obscurations, and the definite emergence required for both one's own and others' aims are never disturbed by non-Buddhist philosophers. Homage to you. So here where it says, and the definite emergence, this is really the Buddha teaches then the path by which another being is able to follow to attain the same kind of perfect abandonments and realizations as him. And he is not sort of ever disturbed by the views of non-Buddhist philosophers who might assert that there is some kind of a self or a creator or others. The Buddha's knowledge accords with reality and thereby is never disturbed by those sorts of wrong views.
Oh yeah, tamati chizu chamba gombo te rawati minji ni ne korto senge shense sanje chumden de minji ba shi ko ne chete bate ne cornal tende sung batele ako jigba yo mare se pe senge de ruda go cho namle ya senge lepsu ne jigba me go na shere ese she sung batar shen ya tamba ranye je panja kayen bata panja karen bata panja ponje ge tab kayen ba chen chen se Kedara Lando Zebe, Koranga Tente Landor Zebe, Rani, Pando Tarshimbe, Yandanga Watars, Pando Tarshimbe, Rani la Yandente Dada, and Demba, Shella Songshin, Tamjebene, Tujanam Labari Yishin, and Debada, Tujanam Jatedar, Lando La Juba, Jukuba. Jukubaya, Yodose, Jukubaya, around the Jesuit to long docene, Tartu, Lam Tetu, Yendetu, top to grace, some jane, telling Juku, yeah.
So, as well, also by Maitreya from his Sublime Continuum or Tara Tantra, he refers to the Buddha as fearless like a lion among his disciples, praising him for these fearlessnesses. In the same way that a lion, in the midst of various other creatures, like non-predatory creatures, would feel a kind of fearlessness. So too, the Buddha is able to, among his disciples, teach without any sort of fear. Furthermore, the Buddha had a purpose in stating the teachings with the four fearlessnesses. The teacher knew the obstructions and the method for eliminating them. He has no fear with respect to those. As he then accordingly engaged in adopting and abandoning, he acquired the good qualities of perfecting abandonment and realization. So because he thus had these good qualities, he taught them and asserted them to others. So thereby his disciples have exceeding faith and belief, and they also engage in adopting and abandoning. So the qualities that the Buddha was able to achieve, he is able to proclaim them fearlessly and thereby engender a kind of faith in his disciples who in turn will also pursue that same path, engage in adopting what is to be adopted and abandoning what should be abandoned.
Oh yeah. Chönam tamje gyule chön shologa chidu tanda sheora. Dona chönam tamje gyule chön shiso chigan shibu don dinese ne kaza konde gi shitenba shidan. Chönam tamje gyule chön sadege tunge temba de sheora. Tiju tishin shibu sonso kunju temba she. Gyulan goba kanyin baside kan gogben gogba gogten she. Ten gogche gi lamden she ti temba ni di sheodo. Ni temba shi di shi yore se. Konde ji shi temba shi da se. Tabdan shi rab ji shi temba ni ki nam sha ti o ti shi yore se. Ani phagbe lam yala je so ji tabdan shi rab ni da se. Phalam yala je la so ba lam de she du phalam yala je shi yore. Te drebu pangdo thar shimbe chugu. Drebu de la pangba thar shimbe pangba phenzo da toba phenzo sigira. Ani mijigba shi dan dembe sugu temba ma se. Mijigba yunde ngangi ge sugu. Pangdo yunde thar shimba sudu togbe yunde tu tengi wara chugu tengi towa. Te tabu sanje chumde de la nga wara sudu sugu tu tengi wara. Sugu sudu sanje be sugi ku. Mi namba chende paa tengi kutila sugu sigira. Chugu sudu nalo ge pangba ta yunde shebe kemba nyidele chugu sigira. Ishi chugu ngoni ku sigira. Konde je chu nam kyumi du tawe chebar tawa to ti changma korwe chu na da nyangel debe chu na changma li ju yo re se. Kyume ne kigre se tende denge yo ra. Kyume ba kande tambu kande chongre kyu yo mar kona rangshin tende chi tu re se. O tende mar changma kyu yo re se ora. Ko samlo tanda karesne kyuyone tele kyu chine thomi rege sam telo le chugyo mara tambu thungsa chi kore sam tatine gochun tital mengere chi kore sam gyara tan zambul ni dedo chine ko de tambu thusa chi yokura chidan se ko se semje se tambu thusa ke yoko marwa thame bara tele thame bara o yende konde je chunam kyumi do tawe chebar tawa odi kangali kyuyore kyu meba ya rangjungi rangshingi kora tayanga chiyo marese che deda metunbe kyu takba le yongya yo marese takba che kyu de takba che ni drebu dhamida yongya kore yo marese ra kyu chik rangchik mato meba che te takba che te kanga severese na dhamida kanga te yongya yo marese gyora rangi timu ma imbe nyeleng kyu re tenchi che nye re mikse kyu kore mato chike takbe gyuchik rangchik che tambo jide che babu rechinera takbe gyuche takba che tichi kyangya sama dramida kanga yuwa yo marese ranga timu mai be nyelengi kyuta lenji che kyang teni kekure sungora sigora mitunbe gyu takba dan Drepung wada tengi marwa. Drepung to Juro Chen Tengora. Jutin Jua Maja Shevachig, and then you are thinking Drepung to Mara. Chizo da. Chizo the Thabkhe city, Kanga Chigristin, Yamarna Bachana. Chizo da. Jigdangi Chebabo, Thabkhe Ranjung Cheba Bajo, take Kanga Severesana, the end of Yamara, the Maris Nambachana. Oh, Nicholas. So let you two go by that so that you made Yawada. You talk about Chigi and it Kanga Damada Kanga, some Chever standing go by Resera. Laluji Truta. Laluji Truta Yanda Bon Job at Sunam, Tension Debanjo at Sudo tell the Chica she tamje na do tuti tam sholga chi de na o tezo kanga de yorese chonam tamje gyule chung sede tagba da gyume do ba tin du yora ti shin shu te du o de shilam na ya.
So, in short, this stanza of 4 lines, beginning the phenomena that arise from causes, and so on, indicates the basis of nirvana and cyclic existence, the 4 noble truths. So here, with the first line of that, where again, it begins with the phenomena that arise from causes, this is indicating the truth of suffering. And then the second line, where it says that the Tathagata proclaimed those causes, that is indicating the truth of the origin of suffering. And then in the third line, as well as their cessation, this is indicating both the truth of the path and then the true cessations that arise from that. And so here in this 1 4-line verse, it is indicating again the basis of nirvana and cyclic existence, the 4 noble truths, the basis of method and wisdom, the 2 truths. So we get into an understanding of ultimate and conventional truth, the 8-fold noble path, both method and wisdom. So the 8-fold path, the kind of methods that one needs to take up in order to be able to achieve such a cessation, and the goal of that, the truth embodiment that is the perfection of abandonment and realization, and the form embodiment possessing the 4 fearlessnesses. So here, the kind of result that comes from practicing the path is the form body of a Buddha, that is what it actually possesses those 4 fearlessnesses and teaches to others, as well as the kind of truth embodiment, both in terms of the wisdom truth body, the kind of realizations, and the nature truth body in terms of the abandonments which a Buddha has actualized. And so all of these are caused in the sense that as this verse teaches, everything arises due to causes. So in addition, it refutes the nihilistic view that sees the phenomena of cyclic existence and nirvana as having no cause. So here, when it comes to all sort of phenomena, our world and beings and so forth, we can talk about samsara as being in general beginningless. We can't point to a beginning to that. But when it comes to specific cycles of causality, we can indicate a beginning, a specific kind of cause, because nothing is coming about without any cause whatsoever. So here it is also eliminating the idea that there could be a permanent entity called time as the non-concordant cause of those phenomena. So again, it's refuting these kinds of wrong ideas and the way of things arising from a principal nature, a divine creator of the world, and so on. So here, this 4-line verse establishes that phenomena can't arise causelessly, nor do they arise from a discordant kind of cause, something like a single permanent cause, without the sort of unique substantial causes and the coordinating conditions. We can't talk about there being like one creator or principle that is somehow acting as the cause of everything. As the Buddha has taught, all phenomena depend upon both the substantial cause and coordinating conditions for them to come about. And so here, this teaching then eliminates those kinds of wrong views, like a creator God having brought about everything, or there being some sort of principal nature, and so on. So integrating the ways of correctly positing the tenets of our own system into the way of dependent arising, it gives a condensed presentation in just 4 lines. So all of these 4 lines contain multitudes, and they also eliminate the kind of wrong views of things arising causelessly or from a creator God or a discordant cause and so forth.
Oh yeah. Tatena ye tamen don denese nambe shilam debu tatu shitemba ni se ara. Lam tabshi ni se debu ku ni se gra. Shilam debu su ya shitemba shi chane de temba ni chan de ra. Shi ta lam dan debu debu tatu tawa tatu da se ta namba ke. Cheba tembe se kare kare la joku ye ra. Cheba tembe. Kechewe shung tsik nyung la, tang kya chenpo tenpa she yin baya se, ta sholo ka chi di shik nyung nyung che ra, chi tang tenri tenpen to mangpo yo ra yo, ho, yin baya. Ta kya nam ki kyun tong tong di, nga nen tenpa tang, di ka nen, dang nen ti tengda samlo tang na, ti tu che ya po yo re se, tenpa tang, ni, di teng, sambe ko ne, tenri tu su samlo tang rwa. Kyundu nyamlegi shundu chebar zenguba shindu kechewa shebar chao she. Oya tene tade ngoa se diri shude. Tenjin debar jungwe chuchu lasta tangma she kanga tenre jindu tanda she ra. Tene chungse samda tele samlutan saba nga ranzu rangdob ji tiye ke yomara shung mambu ne chu tu she ne chu samlutan chu shachira. Ne yige de yige suti ra tebse ra de che se teb la sobache. Ene chimba de legbam par jebje ne shandal pa chimba te sigora. Sona Yeshi tsoni kanto de te tanda don samlo tanda Yeshi tso sagre te shandal pa pento ena sonam je tso sagyora. Sonam Yeshi tsoni sonam Yeshi tsoni kanto de kanto ina echandi table te sigora. Ronam tamba koni tobar shosa tamba koni chugu tamba da sugu tamba sigora. Chugu de randun chugu sigra. Rani pangba tarshin, kemba tarshin bade. Pangba da tokbe yundan yibutela, randun chugu sigra. Rani tarshin bachin gyurgora, kansa rani so. Sugu sudu shayla pa, rangi kemba de shayla tombalya, chugu da sugu pangba da tokba nidi tanya ke yomara, ngusumdu tanya yomara. Kansa ke namba cheche pa. Sugu namba che tanya, ane shayla sung. Rechten kurwa. Chida nga zo topcha tsoode, pa pemba zhonge tsoode sugudire dewara. Nga zo kasi shendun, chanchu ku samlo tandu sa, tsokbe chanchu toban dewa se, pando tarshinbe sugud. Tende che tenge ke kansa jingiwa sho se, ti tso samlo tangi wara. Oh, kanto de, ronam tamba kunyi tobar sho se, tindri bashe. Tende kanzo jende, Remi chuchu la stadi kanchen ki keba mambu samshebe shun kanga tos lo ben sigora. Chuchu la se chungse tosam kumbe namgande toba che samba che samlo ro ta tebe sigora. Kanjo jene yundu ne bada kanchen ki jonge saje temba tar tebe yo tozu patanda kyun ne ya tanda da. Kanchen gombo chawarum bashel sigora. Kanchen gombo kuzi ten gyurjis, kuzi rendo tembe gyurjis. Oh yeah, teaching this.
So therefore, this dependent arising sutra, being an important scripture that reveals great meaning in a few words, captures the Buddhist view and conduct at the basis, path, and result or goal levels. So here, this then, in terms of this Dependent Arising Sutra, as well as the Rice Seedling Sutra, then reveals a great meaning in a few words, in that it captures the kind of teachings on the basis, the two truths, the path, method, and wisdom, and the result or the goal of the two Buddha bodies. And so here, although there are many sort of different teachings on dependent arising, this one really captures the kind of essence of that, and therefore we must always recite this sutra, and by reflecting on its meaning, we must always treasure it as a writing about practice. We must understand that to do so is extremely important. So here, having reflected on the importance of the teaching of dependent arising, we should really cherish this kind of text that is describing it, that is giving us this presentation. So here then we are going to skip to page 143, where we go to the dedication then. Here, by the two collections of merit and sublime wisdom attained through reflecting a little on the Dharma's method of dependent arising, as well as writing about it, explaining it, and worshiping its teacher, may all beings attain the two supreme embodiments. So here, the kind of merit that we have gained through reflecting on this text, through writing about it, reading it, explaining it, and so forth, is not something that is done from like our own side based upon sort of our own ideas, but really based upon having engaged with these teachings of the Buddha. And by doing so, we gain a great amount of merit. We add to our collections of merit and wisdom, which in turn lead to the resulting two supreme embodiments. So when it comes to the Buddha bodies, the truth body or the Dharmakaya is really considered to be the perfection of our own aims. That isn't something that others can interact with, but it is the form body, the Rupakaya, that we are striving for as the main means to fulfill the aims of others, to be able to teach others through an embodied kind of a form. We're making that kind of wish. May I become a being who is able to teach this, to convey this to others. And then by the virtue of studying, reflecting, and meditating a little on the Dharma's method of being unbiased toward the conqueror's teachings in the land of snow. So these teachings that have been carried on in Tibet, may the conqueror's teachings of the land of snow remain for a long time. And may the snowy land's protector, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama Tenzin Gyatso, live a long time. So that is the dedication that I have composed.
Oh yeah, that did it. Oh, that is solution bento lingju di tsora. Oh yeah. Oh, that is it. That is that chema search. That is it. Tanga jon do de march tos. Los chena samgi bashi da jon da de she sa da dynama. Tarshima robs loshana. Oh yeah. Samgi. That's all. Oh, that shalu sidamba, Radi. Jagarake to Arya Shali Sidamba, Nam Mahayana Sutra Sira. Oh, did it Arya Sana Pabayamba, Shali Sidamba Sana, Solin Changbarwa, Nam Sheshara, and Maha Sutra, Dochira, Mayan Sutra, Tebachimbindo in Shera, Tindibuche. That Pege to Papa Salu Jamba Sheshawa, Tebachimbindo, Ostia. Dadi lo mo che shida shi sanje de chanju semba tamje la cha che lo se de ba do de lo za wa ge so jurge de ya ko sha ro do ming de che men do kari kyur ke tin de si go na ne so lu cha be do ye che de le cha che sanje de chanju semba tam cha che lo za wa jurge de ge ro dan do ngi shi de ge da ge to ba tu chi na se Tandi ka dua bodirwa, ka dua bodirsegiora. Sanje nyanglen de sane ka tenne sunga tambo yigil me da chema kar son so babgiwara. O tidu sane de kasra. Ta de kadutele no bangboyara. Chidan auto su katuchena. I'm watching. I take what champion to China to security set up today or I go to Zappa. She doesn't go and Yako, the Yusun with the Tura. She doesn't. I didn't take what champion dokaji to China to jealous what to do. And do it. You get dog to about teaching us. Oh, digge one share tanda kanga do tender and didn't dish shower and it dog to us. And teaching us and get teaching the Turso say, Chanen together. Yana teaching a chum den is woman, ma teaching the chum den de Jebuka, teaching a chum den de Jebuka shoe son say. It is a yana social yachana, dog to about teaching us said, to watch him dot in the turba pay, Calacabo allergic to son said of you. Del Jare. And teaching us said the Jebuka March arena, some den de Jebuka shoe son say, teaching at the shoes and tuition the shadow, Drawet on the shadow payment of the Kujudia. Teaching a some den de Jebuka, Jebuka said the Ming, thought on the Kashet the wa, Kashet and Bishop Kashanana, Jebuka said, Jebu Ming Lamna, Mingitana. Ne mima to do that men bar ta me show ya to do mima yin ba da ba tin de ba chen ne bar ge be khu chi da o tin de me ho ke me bar me show ya kang ba da de me ma bo show ya da ba de me show ya ke be ming yo na ko ta ga yo tin de chen ta ba se o pe je mo ne na le de yo do ke bo me show ne ke be tim che do o ta ne so de su trong ba su sap chi me show na tanda Jebu Cup you said to do Satumba in Sera. Satumba and Italia Kamba Jab Kuchu in Das, they show mess. For the under Jebu Cup you said Satumba till Kamba Jabche. Tell it wrong, you say. Now the mission Nasi Labres. The Jebu Korang Kamba Meshore. Oh, this is all that Jebu Tim Jess had a tap on the mother dream, Ranga Tim Rangaman in a dream. I say, Jebu take. Jebu put not take out, and they do lumber the Kanga to Tronje shout. Jebu Cup said, take it. Oh, to do that. You got out to do that, something the Jebu Cup. Chagu Pombu relas. Chagu Pombu said, Chagu Rito to Nagura chair, go to Dodo and Nagura, you are a Chagu Mamu Pung, they were not draw some Chagu Pombu is Yashara. A Chagu Pombu like alone. What did you check on there?
So now we are going to turn to just reading through the sutra itself. And so here I'm going to follow the one that's at the beginning of the book. And so we will, we've already had the chance to give commentary on this, but just to read through the actual sutra. So it begins, and we sort of do this out of order in the English, but we start with the Rice Seedling, a Mahayana Sutra. And so then we have the title in Sanskrit and the title in Tibetan. And then this is followed by homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So all of this would have been by the translator. That homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is the translator's homage, and then they have put the name in both the Tibetan and the Sanskrit. And then we turn to the beginning of the actual sutra, which begins with the line, "Thus I have heard on one occasion when the Blessed One was staying at Rajagriha on Vulture Peak Mountain together with a great assembly of monks," and so forth. And so here, when we begin with this, thus I heard on one occasion, this is referring to, again, there were times when the Buddha's teachings were compiled. The Buddha's teachings originally were all preserved orally, and they came together and there were various councils. We don't need to get into all of the kind of history of that, but there were various councils, and those including Ananda and Kaishyapa and those kinds of beings who had heard these teachings, then sort of compiled them together. Now, here, when it comes to the teachings of the Buddha, we see sometimes that there are teachings that were given by, say, Vajrapani or other kind of figures, but the main compilers were humans who were students of the Buddha, who then came together in these councils in order to determine what the teachings were. And so then we have this phrase of on one occasion. Now, sometimes we would have that in reference to the Blessed One on one occasion was staying in such and such a place. But here, because it's associated with the thus I heard, it's getting at the kind of rarity of hearing this. This is something that was only heard just once. Now here, when it comes to this place, Rajagriha, there is a story about how at a certain time, the king made like an edict or a law that if someone's house were to burn down, they had to they could rebuild in this place, Rajagriha. This is something that is like sort of held by the king. But it turns out that the king's palace actually went up in flames, and he himself was like forced to follow his own rules and then move to this particular area. So we that's just a little bit of a side history. But then why it's called Vulture Peak, or sort of heap of vultures mountain, is because the sort of rocks that make up this mountain almost look like vultures themselves.
Oh yeah. Oh, then 자꾸 pombe를 했어요. 결혼 또 얘기한갑주 결혼이 근데 전부 다 하서도 결혼 제동 입장갑주요 되셔라. 님도 만분나 연구도 어디지 남자 야부 주래. 이 제동 입장갑주세 근데 세요라서나 산제 좀 된데 최당부 사르나 태 아니 최선도 코로나마도요 말와 지단 메전에 통줄 코로나 때 상부세라. 근데 산제 최선에도 다 근데 세제 랍고도 공데 아니 케바도 중에리아 최선에 나래. 힌두 케바 망보여라. 케바 망보 로마 망보여서 도졸레 트와틀레체 이 송에 송고야래. 근데 게다 최선도 대두자 신도가 네 땡게 위송세게 지어래. 땡게 위송세. 출롱 위송세게 지어래. 봐. 아니 가야 위송세 뭐도 가야세 돼. 가야 위송세게 지어래. 네 셔리 부체 몽게기 부체. 콘졸로마 망보. 자가 텐데 등산에도 가 콘졸 리그레시제 콘졸 롱바치를 도네 로마 망보체 소스 콩콩 카가래 정도. 근데 제 로마 망보 연계 개바 최수장이라. 에터줄라 저틀레 제제 송연고 주데. 어때저도 콘졸 넘바 산제게 송리아 어때 야분도 삼제 산제게 진주 로마 차도래. 근데 산제 콘졸 가반도네 때냠도 로마 현다 두서 연구는 또 넘바 차도네. 디샤네 장거들라고도 와. 맞도 참상을 들레 또스망 또스녀와 요시그라. 또 입장갑 주세데. 그저 로마 입장갑 중갑 주체바. 나 중소아. 어디에는 적도 입장갑 주래서라. 어디래. 개벽가 가서 결혼 또 입장갑 주 결혼게 근데 첨보다 가서. 결혼이 근데 초첨보서 그래. 장갑만 벗겨지라. 전주 선바 첨보 rabdo mambo tada janju semba mambo nyamdo shubarese ese chumde otibado chilamna tabu.
So then, continuing, with the Blessed One staying at Rajagriha and Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great assembly of monks, 1,250 monks, and very many bodhisattva great beings. So here, this is indicating, we know that when the Buddha first attained enlightenment, he only, his first teaching was given to his five formerly sort of fellow aspirants who became his disciples. And then as time went on, the Buddha the audience for the Buddha's teachings began mostly as like Hindu scholars, as those who were sort of more scholarly beings who would get together and kind of discuss these things. And over the course of time, we can see how there are many various scholarly beings who acted as disciples of the Buddha, and those like Malgadhyayana and Shariputra and so forth. Over time, the number who are disciples, who are followers of the Buddha, then would increase more and more. So we sort of see how they might get together for these kinds of like conferences, discussions, and eventually then they end up following the Buddha's teachings. And so from those 5 original disciples, we're now at a point, and we see that at the beginning of sutras, there's slightly different numbers of how many there were in attendance. And this really is indicating that the extent to which the Buddha's teachings have been adopted adopted and spread. And so there was that assembly of monks as well as a very great, very many bodhisattva great beings.
Oh, that is one. Chitang ko chue de tambu she de tapshin da mamu do ka she chitang milia she mi ko da tende la she ra ro no ne ka she yang ti ko tambu ne ka so de ta de chi de mo che o ya de de che ta chanju samba o de re so se chanju samba chamba chimbu ma de kelon ton ge ja kindu chimbu de so chanju samba kindu chimbu rabdu mamuto da tapchu de shu de ese lenji de shu de ese chedo de ba sheri chanju samba sam o da de le ya teba chimben do yana ne kelon do de ngele labdu ase je ngele labete chere chene de la gora cosa c'è ene di chanju samba to chisu labdu ase chanju samba teba chimbe do ne nyenge do de chanju samba mare de ngele la gu mare ser to yora tele ane kindu kelon do chumden de chungdu ti jundu ne mangche de shugu yora sanje chesa chanju samba to che san ene pa zu peje che shi shenda le shega mangche da jiden kam shenda shene chombe chanju samba mambu yo sam gara o ti ende ko kindu so cha ku shep cha da ene chumden de chungdu ti kindu na namgyu shungge de sonza ngele la bin so ra chiwa ton da chanju samba to ne chi shu na shenda pa simje ton de shenda pa cha so chi ge wa de so tin de chan ni se re chung do oh imbe ti chi labshana tu chana.
So here then we get to the sort of specific setting. At that time, Venerable Shariputra went to the promenade of Maitreya, the Bodhisattva great being. Now here, just to step back for a moment, we have again this description of this assembly of monks, 1,250 monks, and a very many Bodhisattva great beings. And so someone might wonder, I mean, the Buddha teaches in many sort of different guises, in many different ways, in accordance with the needs of disciples. And now here, when it comes to this and describing first that there's this great assembly of monks and then followed by and a very many bodhisattva great beings, someone might think, well, if this is a Mahayana sutra, then why are the bodhisattvas not mentioned sort of first? Why is it that they aren't put first? Well, the thing about bodhisattva disciples is that their primary concern is really teaching to others, being able to go out and give the Buddha's teachings to others. Now, the reason that a great assembly of monks, the Sangha, is mentioned first is really to indicate the importance of having respect for the Sangha as being those who are carrying on the teachings of the Buddhas. So we shouldn't sort of look at this as being out of order or something, in that there's a purpose in having that first and then going to the bodhisattva great beings.
Oh yeah, thank you. Then the get to what teaching na shebana tapchi to show the setibato lingshi do se do lingshi the chonso serashara. Then the ma ling lang ba se do and the karana so se tapchi to show the karana so then the so se ling lang ba se the do. Then the ese chedan damba shari bu sharo chanju samba chambu chambe tobar chawe cho kalawa terson de chine penjo yanda bar kawar chawe tam namba mambu chene dude yiga dolibla ko do shara tande chanju samba chambale trigu do trigu to se chamba de do ngazo shirab nimbu ne chere se chi che do chanju samba chambale ni shari bu chwa chele chene do de yong gara o ti ende ko shari purwa shari bu do de shara se de regla je minister amade minister ni shari bu ma shari bu imbana shari bu la jera ti de chanju samba chembo se chanju samba se de lana mebe chanju la samba se Tia rangi tonda chibu mayamba semje tamje ke tonga drupya ke chedu semba sonza semba chambo seda. Chidang chanju la semba te nyandu ya chanju la semba rwa. Nyandu Chanju Ranje Chanju Yorwa, Tarwa Yorwa, Nyandu Tarwa Ranje Tarwa Yordo, Nyandu Chanju Ranje Chanju Yore. You know, Tiba Chembe Chanju Sambadala, Chanju Samba Samba Chambo said. Yaranga Chanju Samba Chanju La Sambateda, Madades, the Sambia Tambia to Veshido, Samba Sonza Tisido, Samba Chambo said. Oh, Nicardo. Seda Damba Sharibu, Chanju Samba Samba Chambo Chambe, Trevor Chave, Cho Kalawa Tersonde, Chanju Samba Chamba Patu, Uyara Patu, the Koran Sharibu, the Tingam Dunyam the Pandu, there's a Chokala Sonde. That did Rachine. Penzi Kawar Jave, Tam Namba Mambuche, Penzi Tachindu to Sera, Tandil Tiore, Namasudi Sarah, Tendechi Omare. The time ever race Gora, Chiba Namasudi Chagumade, that is I not to consume much chat at Tichera. The Kawacha Pachindu to catch a mambo, shiny any, Tunda, Tinyam the Tiwati. Our Tam Mambuchan and do the Niga Tolula Kudos. Tole bless you, but anything on the terre. Then some Buddha in really Tiwati, take catch and Bucine, but without Dan got it, thank you setting at the Rene, then Jab Chichawara, and then Maji, Tolib Kalia Shunene, catch and book Tiwati Lecher, etc. What did the Chindona?
So, here, then we begin this section that starts with "Thus I have heard on one occasion," through that first paragraph. Then, and very many bodhisattva great beings is a sort of basis for the discussion that will come. And then, when we get into at that time, the venerable Shariputra, the sort of specific discussion that is going to be taken up then begins. So here we can see that the setup is that in this case, at that time, Venerable Shariputra went to the promenade of Maitreya, the Bodhisattva great being. And so here, when it comes to the kind of exchange that is going to take place, it will be between Shariputra and Maitreya. Like in the Heart Sutra, it is Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. Now, Shariputra, just to give a little bit about his name, Putra means the son of. So, well,
Oh, this one, yeah.
yeah. I'll try not to get too much into the details, but Shari was probably his mother's name. And so then when we have this, the Bodhisattva, the great being, the word like that we often use with Bodhisattva, Changchub Sempa, the Changchub, the enlightenment, this one having the thought of enlightenment. Enlightenment can refer to any of the three levels, that of a hearer, a solitary realizer, or of a Bodhisattva. But the reason why they are called like a great being, we often see, is because of the greatness of their aspiration, of aspiring for that state of not just their own liberation, but being able to benefit all sentient beings. Their thought is for all sentient beings and thereby is great. And so now we get to this kind of, on his arriving, they exchanged many pleasantries. So Shariputra and Maitreya, make their sort of greetings of one another. It's not necessarily super formal. And then having met, they sat together on a stone slab. So unlike our sort of modern settings where we think, oh, we need to put a special like cushion and have a special setup, here they are just sort of sitting on this stone slab and then have this exchange.
Oh, yeah. Tene tsedan demba shari pu chanju samba chambo chambala degej meso se ta chotira chamba se tendere chomden deji salu jangbala sine kelon namlan dode sunso se kelon da su tenjin reban jonga tonga de che tongo su che tonga de sanje tongo she ka chene chomden de chang me sonwar jurna chamba tewarshebe ka chebe and then dode tenchi kelonda su tenjin reban jonga ka chene ka sanje ne ka shena ase otan de lingshi de chomden de salu jangbal sine shinga tali chi pegu sara shinga yora kede shinga talo pene ne drag jangbang ngombo be shimbangbo yabu kede de oran deshin tele sine ne sanje kelonda nyamdo yenge solya tele zone kelonda su tenjin reban jonga ton de kande yabu kedo skutan kela tenese su tenjin reban jonga ton de che ton os su che ton de sanje ton os ra What in this order? This one and the Jangmasore. Tension the banjo at the car, tension the banjo on the church on a church car, church on a Sanja car, Keke Masore. That's Sanja car comparison. Janju Samba Chambalia, Conductivity, Tishango, the Conqueror. Janju Samba. The Caresana, Masumba Caresana. Oh, te. Kilo Mabuchi and Sara, Sanja Sumba, oh, Sanja Sum, Gangang Kuya Samsa, Majayu Sarwa. Sante Sumba Sama. Kuyo Mare Chanju Samba Tozo Lodu Chawata Tozo Yabu Shingi over the Chita Chawata Tondalia. And the Changmaso days or that Chambe, Joetilichen and Korashe to the Combat. There's no door into Gora. Sanjay Jesu now Chambe Joetilichen to the Shed to the Conza, then Doidan to Yora. Most Sanjay Kesogio Mare. Into Casa. What did it? Kanshinase. O teach you na Sanje ne kan chidar tenjin reba juan tona chö ton chidar chö tona Sanje ton se tezu kande reese ya chö chö tege se meba ta so tiba to chindo na.
So then the sort of the discussion then that takes place begins with then the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva great being Maitreya. And so he's describing this kind of scene wherein Maitreya, here today, the Blessed One, after looking at a rice seedling, spoke this to the monks. So here it's likely that the Buddha was walking by some kind of a rice paddy and seeing these rice sprouts, this nice green. He sort of pointed them out and made this statement. So he said to the monks, "Monks, he who sees dependent arising sees the Dharma. He who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha." And so after saying that, though, he didn't say anything else. So after saying that, the Blessed One said nothing more. So now Shariputra is asking, Maitreya, what is the meaning of that sutra spoken by the Sugata? What is dependent arising? What is the Dharma? What is the Buddha? How does one see the Dharma if one sees dependent arising? How does one see the Buddha if one sees the Dharma? So here, the Buddha, really in teaching to those with the sharpest kind of faculties, has just pointed this out. He says only that he who sees dependent arising sees the Dharma, and he who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha, knowing that this is really only accessible to those who are of highest faculties. Now, many might sort of like pridefully try to claim that they understand whatever the Buddha is saying, but here Shariputra, in his sort of humility, is admitting that he doesn't understand and is asking to Maitreya, what is the intention of the Buddha? So the sutra, that which is actually spoken by the Buddha, is then what Maitreya will respond to here.
Oh yeah, did this. Oh yeah, did this. Sanjay Chigachima, that Chanju Samba Chambe Spalan Javrata. Sedan Damba Shara the Debo, the Geshi Mesos land in the social. Samba Sharibu de la Chumden de Chujitabu, or Sanjay Chumden de Chusama Tabu de Rangada Sama can get it is ora. Tabu Tamje Kemba, London, Natamje Kemba. Kelonda, Su Tenjin Reverend Tonga de Chu Tonga, Su Chu Tonga de, and the name of the Chegura, Su Chu Tonga de Sanjay Tonga. Yola Tenjin Reverend take Carestama Legua. And the name Yonso Shepherd Chawa the Shegura, Shejade. Yonso Shepherd Chawa, Ling Shi Ling Lamba, Yonso Shepherd Chawa, Shekua the Shegura, Yonso Shepherd Chawa. Oh, the Tenjin Reverend Joanne Kanshana, Tenjin Reverend Joan Shechawane, Dita days, or Sanjay Sombe Tenjin Reverend Joan, Su Tenjin Reverend Joan Tona, Chutongo, Tenjin Reverend Joan, the Diris, Caresna, and the Yuban de Jones. Judan Ken, the Yube, Drepung de Jungu de Judan Ken man and Jungumare said. The Kibachin did Judan Ken Koran and Juachin Geji Sonda, Midaba Sonda, Te Drebu de Jurachin and Midaba Skigrese. Judan Chebata, Midaba to make and lechon to the Shegatoa. Or the Yuban de Jones, Judan Ken, the Yuban de Jose, Kumi to kill the Kagura. The Kibachin de Jutan Mogi Kea Yomare. Kukuna de Medaba, Urachin, Yelena, Lenji Chicken, so on, and then they would get what an acid. Kuakwa Chigi, Chebabu Chigi, ya, Garsor, Chito in a dot, Chigay Chebabu in a current, Takwa Chira Chigi, Samba Cheba de Paka. Medaba to make a lechon. Kukuna, Urachin, manager, would get to Marisol. Oh, Nicarsor. Dike Bechin, Dike, Kandi Mari Bekin. Duchina, there's a Nubekian Latensa. Kona Timu Maimba, you sangman drebu sangma keto mara. Kona Timu Maimba, Nyelin, you de Geshe Chigi, you de Timu Maimba, drebu Chigamato, you sangman drebu Samji Kigamarwa. You never saw some neighbor and Nubeki Latensora. Oh, Duchinam saying, Duchi can get that and reality Tiger. Mari Bekin, even Duchi Lake. Tome Mariba, dancing on even Duchi Lesa. Chagdang Wangi. Oh, Duji Kenji number Sheba, Lea Pakshasha. And number Sheba Kenji, Minda Su, Shiba Mingsu de Tru. Minda Su Kenji, Kichi Tru, and then make it kitchen, never kitchen, kitchen, soba, one butus to Viora. Kichi Tru. Kichi Latene, Kichi Kenji Sora, Kichi Kenji Rekba. Kenny Yula ya, Yu dan Wangbo, Namshesum Treasure Chess or Regbas, the talk about the Regbas in Mingtashara. Regbe Kenji, Sora, Yuche, Yusuche, Miwanche, Roa, and then Namshesum Chess on the Dakochi Toro de Chigora, so Boga Jatinako, Sorgiwarachi. Regbe Kenji Sorase, Sore Kenji Seba, Soa Johnsona, Teletenani, Soa. Pembanduga, never do a penny mebere, some tit so good. So I do it on your setting. Can you seba, can you lemba? Seba de you do, so the Johnson to me, Johnson, did a train on some seba kigora. There was Johnson and Medina on some seba kigora. Oh, down you in a cotimu, get the mato, Tinde Chagna de Kigomar. Can you lemba se? Lembe can you? Sibase. Shuba Sibe land, but 2 cents. Sibe Kenji, Kawa, Shuba Sibe Kenji, Kawa Chimaladura. Kawa Kenji Gashi Kaba the Shua Soba. At the Yange, Sim Gesembresha, Yangeta, Mingandum Batan, Tungechun, Muyeta, to the Kanech that Shagirwanga to Buchosuna. Tungyawata, the Luigi Tunge, Yiji Tungetele, Yimedewata. Chubanam Juaju. Chuba said, Jenny, Condro, Naja, Trado, Jan Simla Soba, Sem Tudura, oh, they took one, Yamo Mambo Jadra at the Sivara. Chubanam Junde, the Tungaji Pumbu Chabu, Bashiba the John Duro, Deletane, Tungaji Pumbu, Chimbo, Tungaji Pumbu Sudu Mambo Kejera, Chimbo Sudu Toma Mebana, your Toma Mebana, Tandabudus, Yonde, your Dase, Chimbo, Bashi Sudu, Ta Meba, Rawa Ta Meba. Pumbutu the John Race, but the Rawa thought that Yamdutina Junior Maresa, Pumbu Bashiba the John Juros, whatever the children.
So then in response to Shariputra's question here, once this was said, the Bodhisattva, great being Maitreya, said this to the venerable Srasvati Putra, Reverend Shariputra, the Blessed One, the Lord of Dharma, so the Buddha being the one who has this kind of mastery, understanding of the Dharma, who understands everything, the omniscient one, said, monks, he who sees dependent arising sees the Dharma. He who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. And so if, regarding that, you ask what dependent arising is, it is as follows. So he's going to then explain this completely to Shariputra. And he says then, the Buddha has explained, so if regarding that, you ask what dependent arising is, it is as follows. Because this exists, this occurs. Because this arose, this arises. This is called dependent arising. So here, by giving this kind of presentation, when we see because this exists, this occurs, this indicates that both causes and results are impermanent. And because they are impermanent, it eliminates that there could be, well, first, this kind of declaration that because this occurs, or sorry, if this exists, this occurs, and because this arose, this arises, that eliminates the idea that there could be production that is causeless, that all of these phenomena come about without any sort of a cause. And so too, it eliminates that there could be some kind of a permanent cause, whether that is some sort of a creator God or whether it is some sort of a principle in nature. Neither of those are possible. So we also need to have as will be kind of explained as it comes. So that is dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur, and we'll go through these 12 links. But this is also indicating that a cause needs to be efficacious. It needs to actually be able to bring about that specific result. So it has to be an effective cause, an impermanent cause, and not just a single cause, actually, but causes and conditions coming together. So here it says then that is dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur. So when we have this ignorance, due to that, we have attachment towards our side, aversion for the other, and thereby create karma. And karma, those conditioning factors, dependent on conditioning factors, consciousness. They lay down a kind of imprint on consciousness. And dependent on consciousness, there is then name and form. And dependent on name and form, the 6 sense bases. And dependent on the 6 sense bases, contact. So then when we have the coming together of, for example, form, a visual, consciousness, and the eye sense power, those 3 things, then we can have sight. And so too, when we have the coming together of those, then we have contact. And dependent upon contact, there is feeling. We have a feeling of pain, pleasure, or a neutral kind of a feeling. And based upon that feeling, dependent upon feeling, there is craving. So if it is a suffering kind of a feeling, there's a craving to be freed from that. If it's a happy sort of feeling, there's a craving to have that, to keep that. And in turn, this then leads to grasping. So dependent on craving, grasping, a kind of intensification of that, and dependent upon grasping, becoming. Dependent on becoming, then that karma which has been nurtured leads to birth, and dependent on birth occur aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, unhappiness, and conflict. So here, rather than just the last link of aging and death, there's also the kind of sorrow, and then the lamentation or verbal expression of that. The sort of misery referring to more of our physical misery, and then unhappiness, the kind of mental dis-ease that comes, as well as conflict, all of the kind of disturbance that we have within our mind, jealousy and anger, and all of those things come from this. So this entire great heap of suffering occurs in this way. And so the entirety of this is not a sort of causeless or any of those other problematic assertions, but rather occurs in this way. This is the causal process that leads to it.
Oh yeah. Tell Maribang Gagwen to Jingashi to Tinema. Oh, de Garesna de Chita Marikba Gurua, Niban Duchi led Drebua. Some Marikbang Gadu Duchi Gungagba and Drebu de Kekuyara. Gungagba and Drebu de Kewa Tunyamba Gora. Tantan did Gagba said the Timare. Pena Sabin Garden Yuguchevora, Sabin Mangan Yuguche Yomara. And then they got so Namjan Choke tended to Shegora. Tame Bangusum to Tone, Tame come the Tame Bangusum to Tosona, and a Tome Maribate, God who is the Connivacho Dugara. Nimbo never checked Rosonate, with the child Tinga, Tizin Yoruchin, Niparuchi Mabachal, they said Telocogora. Maribanga said, Nimbo top Chambuchane, Tomba Yungusum to Tobe City, Yavukesonani, Maripade, God who is never shot do this or never show do this. Maribad man, I didn't even do less. I think never show do that. Hotel Cogora. Number Shebanga de la Maribangabe, Dujingabe, number Shebanga, number Sheba. Oh, number Shebangabe, Minda Sungabe, ne kar sura meta sunga Geshe trunga be ne rekbanga be choanga be sebanga be lembanga be sibanga be kyawanga be kashida ne nyange da minga domba da tungye da ye metewa da chukba semle nyomo mambo sem chudu atu chukba nam gaban jude te dar tungye je phungbu chenbo ro mambo tungye mambo yude phungbu chenbo sene thoma meba ne yoda washikba de gaban juro se o rawe ta ge tombe phungbu washikba de gado re se o diba to chilam na tene chomden de je ore dilab se tene chomden de je tenjen de bar jwa she so ti diba to lam de ya amjang choge tende songdo chi de kune nyamo choge tende mari bal te chon kune nyamo chodera ta de ga se namjang choge tende tangme to ne namjang choge tende songdo hanga pata.
So then it turns to likewise, with the cessation of ignorance, conditioning factors cease. Now here we need to be clear that this is a description of the purified side of the 12 links. It's not like in general, when we talk about something like that is cause and result, the cause needs to cease before the effect can come about, right? So we're not speaking in that sort of way, wherein like a seed needs to cease before there can be a sprout. It's not in that kind of capacity that we're talking about cessation here, but rather it is through the application of a direct countermeasure or a direct antidote. So by developing the kind of direct realization of selflessness that counteracts that ignorance, eventually we can reduce the force of it, completely eliminate it, cause it to cease. And so here, this is a description of then the thoroughly purified side of dependent origination, the 12 links of dependent origination, as above it was the thoroughly afflicted side. So here we need to be clear that it's not just talking about cessation in general, but through the application of an effective antidote. So with the cessation of ignorance, conditioning factors cease. With the cessation of conditioning factors, consciousness ceases. With the cessation of consciousness, name and form cease. With the cessation of name and form, the 6 sense bases cease. With the cessation of the 6 sense bases, contact ceases. With the cessation of contact, feeling ceases. With the cessation of feeling, craving ceases. With the cessation of craving, grasping ceases. With the cessation of grasping, becoming ceases. With the cessation of becoming, birth ceases. And the cessation of birth brings the cessation of aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, unhappiness, and conflict. This entire great heap of suffering will cease in that way. So all of this suffering, the entirety of that is something that is solely causally created. And so thereby, when the causes are eliminated, it will also cease. So this, the Blessed One calls dependent arising.
Oh yeah. That che gangshe na setera. De yonso shebar cheven drebula na yoba de tenguara. Sheja yonso shebar cheven drebula na yoba. De kong na yoba sesigara. Moya. De tenguara. Che gangshe na pagbe lam yana jeba te se palam yala ke de sigara. Jeba de se. Yanda be ngase. Da pagbe lam yana jeba se. Yanda be ngase. ngāgi le number takbe kēmbasigra, pākbe ishi chāgidwa, pākbe kānsalma to mēbari chāgri. Tāngbo te, yāntakbe ngāgi le number takbe pākbe kēmbasigra. Yāntakbe le ji, dīswa, dītādi yāntakbe tawa siya, tōngba nyi tōba la soba, yāntakbe tawa tisya. Pākbe lam yāna ja dītādi, yāntakbe tawa siya. Yane tongba nyela soba toba de me da yang da be toba she tawa de shan la tönje ji nga ku ne long ji ge kemba chi wara ti su do yang da be nga she ni nga ge le number da be kemba nga ne to yang da be le ji ta su ne lu ji le number da be kemba yang da be choa su lu nga ni ge le number da be kemba yang da be choa su de lam koma tobala chunduche pagbe lamde. Yang dagbe temba sudu, ngama ochange datudu, yang dagba temba. Yang dagbe tingize, datali nyambashe tingize. Ene tiri, pagbe lam yala jeba shie chate ese. O dili palam yala kesi gres. Tan dili achidan pagbe lam yala kesi ro palam che. Ngaranzu nyamso langja sinimado, o tiye, tin dreba na liyongu tuwa kamashitina. Ti karesina, yang dagbe tawa sudu, 소소고 메다 동에 또 담을 소바 가르신게 텔 안타 베타와시 야나 레종들 소바 테주 강가 텐들 차초 양다 베타와시 양다 베토바시 타와테 라게 토바데 군에 론지게 토바 샨달라야 템버시 발라 소바 nga 군에 론지 토바 양다 베 nga시드 에네 쮸라 소바 nga게 쮸 차마 치조 nga 젤 소바 테주 파네 로와 nga ke kone shanla tembala soba tawatazo yanda be legitasi luji kone sochu machimba lemba loyim la soba tezo pangbe kone o teni nebatel siora yanda be choasde lunga nige le number ta be kimbasin delia ti chawdo yanda be choa 류당 아니게 건데 소소 메시지해야 될 자라 양다베 초아 팀당게와 롱베 팀당게와 서봐 소체벌라 서봐 다 미게베 내가 전에네 잘라사네 류추답지야 돼 만들어 어 딜릉아니가 그네 미게와 또 방배 거네 아니 롱베 팀당게와 서봐 로 테체다 소주시네 류초야다 심전세네 류초야라 소바다 티베고네 룡아 예sun고네 티바사베고네 추답세라 메시게 그 탑시셔야 돼. 양답에 소화세. 팀바체 벤조 주베데 양답바체. 이게 어떤 만지바체. 야구체 소소 깔레게 소소 빼셔서나 양답에 소화를 되라. 어디 들리셔도. 양답에 소화세. 이거 말이야. 양답에 소화세 되라. 나르마 대서 미냐 받쳐와다 연대 사바토에 전도 준비시 거야. 양답에 템바세. 내가 좀 마시바체 야네야도 템바. 템바도 그뒤에나 티케션베서라. 아주 템바니셔 세마도 내가 가르쳐는 소소 때다 때 집에 qab을 때다 때 지금 요즘 템고도 디매네 당가서 연구인도 하고도 주대상 제대 땐데 제제 어때 제면서 섭소제 지는 답제 리제 땐데 지금도 그 템바디하고 텐션은 남매제 현대 사무다시는 답제 리조제 제제 연구도 가리 있나 그 내가 가르치는 거 되게 단단 대치고 여기서 못하다게 여기서 잠바셔서 현대 사무실에 다음에도 와 대단하는 너도 걸어제 냐가도 와 강 내가 가르치나 로나 두고 여기서 양내양도 치료 겹도 따스따시 현대 연구도 와 현대는 답지그라 근데 라두고 여기서 공부해서 때때 셈템부 차일 뱅도 와 뱅겨와라 그때 남주네 대신 양한테 선대선 가지고 삼체 누구도서 시간파 장가를 잡는 가지고 운중을 장가 제도상 그 셈템부터 팽기도 와 어디나 신체제 거두이나 셈되고 어디 그래 뭐다 야 된듯 야다 배 잠바체 네 그만둬서 야다 배 좋아체 야다 배 잠바체 야다 배 띵인제 어디 그런저 남주 바로 삼루타나 텐데야나 중요 삼루타나다 저 강가 검자라 내가 저 생고도 검매대대 만다라 치 검하차에 뛰어라 잠바 검자 저와 검자 자주샘 검자를 검자 만다 치 검기요 말마도 텐데야나 중요 코아코다 콜로도 삼루타 통마면에 삼루타나 샘린 조란 두그라 샘리 구조 태비를 떠서 그 차샤나 때 구조 태시오 말아 예소 어디 가서래 원래서 야다베 땡이지 되네 파벨람 야라 제바 셰차데세 드레부 토바다서 다 드레부 팔람 야라 제데거네 드레부 톱시게 람다 톱에 냥데를 쏘바 대주 강가 찍도 뛰데 니좀 된데 최세데 팔람 야라 제다 디 공발레 때네 톱에 타르발라 쏘바 All day in Drepung to Gangalia, Chusicres, Tibet.
So this continues saying, what is the Dharma? And here it is the Noble Eightfold Path. Really the kind of this is the correct sort of understanding, the Noble Eightfold Path that represents the sort of correct knowledge of a Buddha. Anyway, so here we'll go through this. It says, namely, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So here, these represent the kind of resultant results that are attained by someone who has practiced this. But this is also the kinds of things that we ourselves need to take up into practice. So right view here refers to a kind of correct view of the way that things are. So the correct view of emptiness, but also an understanding of impermanence and suffering and so forth. And based upon having that kind of understanding, that right view, then that translates into how we think about things in terms of the thoughts that motivate our speech and our actions. So right thought is really having realized the way that things are through that kind of right view that translates into how we think about things. And then in turn, how we act with our speech and our body. So right thought is referring mostly to those kinds of intentions that then translate into the way that we speak. So right speech would be that kind of speech in which we have abandoned lying and harsh speech and divisive speech and idle gossip and so forth, all of those non-virtues. And as well, right action then is connected with our having abandoned those kinds of non-virtues of body, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and so forth. So those then are acting both sort of in accordance with the laws of the land. So the next one then is right livelihood, which consists of not just kind of acting in ways that accord with the laws of the land and so forth, but engaging in a means to sustain oneself without harming others. Our way of our livelihood should not be mixed together with any kind of non-virtuous activities, any sort of activities that cause harm. So, and then there is right effort. This is really striving to develop those kinds of qualities which one has not yet developed and enhance and increase those which one has already developed. Then there is right mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has gained a lot of traction in our society. And in this context, we often talk about the sort of four close placements of mindfulness. But mindfulness is something that is really important in any kind of situation in all of our lives, in our day-to-day kind of life. Particularly maybe if you are elderly, you have a better understanding of this in the sense that if you're not mindful of how you're moving, how you're acting, you could fall down. So you have to be more aware of the movements of your body and so forth. But mindfulness is really being aware, being careful in whatever we're doing. Like if we're driving, we are present with driving. If we are walking, we recognize that we are walking. And having this kind of practice of being mindful is something that is extremely beneficial for creating mental stability. Like, for example, when we do a meditation of holding our mind on the breath and counting the breath, that helps to generate a kind of stability, draw the mind in. If we are mindful, aware of whatever activity we are doing, that is going to enhance our mental stability. And then there is a right concentration. And here, right concentration can involve thinking about things like dependent origination, those kinds of other sort of topics that we might be concentrating on. And something like reflecting on dependent origination. I mean, all of these topics that we are taught are things that are for us to meditate on. They're not really like objects that are out there, but they're really things to integrate and move, inspire our minds. Whether we're talking about love and compassion or these 12 links of dependent origination, these are things that are meant to help us transform. And so this is called the Noble Eightfold Path. And combining it with the attainment of the result and nirvana, the Blessed One calls these the Dharma. So this path, the kind of practices that one should take up, as well as the the results that come from them. This is what the Blessed One calls the Dharma.
Oh yeah, that is Zosha.
So we are out of time for today, and we will then pick up again from the sutra itself.
Oh yeah.
Thank you for your teachings today, Ginla, and thank you, Katrina, for your translations. Again, if you'd like to make an offering for the teachings, check the chat box for the information, and we'll conclude with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losung's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah, tuchen angela.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Jemajeyo.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Oh,
Recording stopped.